Everybody can see it?
We can. Thank you, sir. It's all here.
Getting better. You know, I've growing up in the 50s and 60s, the formative years, there was a lot going on with Tibet and China and things like that. I wasn't at the time really thinking of stamps, but just a very interesting country in the back of my head, the Dalai Lama visits and so forth. And then I'm reading, I think this one was from American Stamp Dealer and Collector. And I saw the award-winning Alan Warren collection. I said, this is, I'm going to get to learn a little bit about this one. So I was looking forward to that, and called Alan. He said he'd be glad to, get it ready. You just can't take an exhibit and turn it into a presentation. It takes a little bit of time to do that and to do it well. But that's the key with this. And so this is what we're going to be doing tonight. The other thing that I find of interest is a great issue not too long ago about our Philatelist of influence in the country. And I'm so glad to see Alan on that as a participant and for all the work he does. And Alan's like a buried treasure. There's so much stuff about him that you don't know until somebody else writes about it, or, you ask him. And just very, very modest about what he does. But he started off as a chemist. He's retired now, but he works chemistry in laboratory, the medium-sized international chemistry and chemical manufacturer. His 40-year career with the firm included experience in product research and development, customer technical services, international marketing, laboratory safety and security, and facilities management. Philatelically, he began as the president of the campus stamp club in college, and he's also involved with organized philately for over the last 60 years, locally, nationally, and internationally. He began collecting as a child and has continued ever since. Current collection areas include pre-stamp postal history of Sweden, stamps and postal history of Tibet, and U.S. and Scandinavian first day coverage. He's a member of over 50 philatelic organizations and has held office in several of them. He's a charter member of the American First Day Coverage Society and served as recording secretary and a director. He is past president of the APS Writers Unit 30, and his articles have appeared in over 70 journals in the US and worldwide. Nationally, Alan is an accredited philatelic and literature chief judge, has contributed to 2 editions of the APS Manual of Philatelic Judging. He currently serves on several APS committees, including the Hall of Fame Committee and the Committee on Care and Preservation of Philatelic Materials. Alan is past president of the Scandinavian Collectors Club and president of the former Scandinavian Philatelic Foundation. He was secretary of International Interphil, exhibition that was held in February in Philadelphia in 1976. And it's hard to believe we have another one of those coming up in Boston in 4 years. But he was also involved with Nordia 01, the exhibition, which was held in Tucson in 2001. Many honors from the Scandinavian Collectors Club Polander Award, Distinguished Service Award, and honorary life membership of the American First Day Coverage Society, the APS John Luft Award for exceptional contributions to philately, and the Distinguished Service Awards of the Military Postal History Society and the APS Writers Unit. Other honors include the Charles J. Peterson Philatelic Life Achievement Award of the Collectors Club of New York Award, and the Collectors Club of New York, the Alfred F. Lichtenstein Award for service to philately. He's a fellow of the Royal Philatelic Society, London, and in 2019, he signed the Distinguished Role of Philatelist at the Stockholmania exhibition. So with that, I will turn this off, and I will turn the screen over to Alan in the show. And Alan, you're on.
Okay, I'll share as soon as you go off.
I hope I'm off. Am I off?
This says you cannot start screen sharing while the other participant is sharing.
Yeah. Okay,
I still see your material.
Yeah, okay. I don't, but you do. It's usually the other way around. How about that? Is that better?
Oh, okay.
Good, okay.
Now it should work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you're all set then on our end.
Okay. Here we go. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay. Thanks very much for the elaborate introduction, Paul. In fact, I think that would probably take up more time than my actual presentation. But in any event, let's take a look at the stamps and postal history of Tibet. Tibet has long held a sense of mystery due to its remoteness and references to the country as being on the roof of the world and its capital, Lhasa, as being the Forbidden City. Now, here's an outline of topics we'll be talking about. I'm going to start with the Stampless mail period in Tibet. Then I'll talk about the Francis Younghusband expedition just briefly. And then actually China invaded Tibet back around 1909, 1910, and issued Chinese stamps that were overprinted for use at the Tibetan post offices. But they were only there for about 2 years. And then there are the native issues of Tibet. There's the first issue of 5 values, the second issue of 2 values in 1924, the third issue of another 5 values, and we'll go through these in detail. And then the so-called official stamps, telegraph stamps, and then I'll talk briefly about the literature that one can refer to learn about this stuff. So stampless mail was conveyed by couriers or runners. Here's an example of a official letter from 1862, was sent from Tibet to the foreign ministry in Nepal. Most of the correspondence in these days was done either officially, government officials, the Dalai Lama, or by traders who had some education, obviously. There were a lot of Nepal traders who actually settled and conducted business in Tibet. This is a letter from what's called the Court of Khasa. It's a town in Tibet that some of these Nepalese traders resided in, and it was sent to Kathmandu, Nepal in 1895. This office was only known, and its mail was only known with these markings in a very narrow period of 1895 and 1896. This is a 1923 letter from the 13th Dalai Lama to an officer of the Royal Court Palace in Kathmandu. And he's advising that he is sending a gift to the King of Nepal. And this red hand stamp seal was placed outside, and also other seals were placed inside the letter to identify that it's official and from the Dalai Lama. To head off any interest in Tibet by Russia, England sent Colonel Francis Younghusband along with troops in 1903 into Tibet. The 1903 Frontier Commission became the military commission the following year. So here's an early British postmark when Younghusband was there. This is the crest that appears on his stationery, and it would be on the back of this envelope, which was addressed to his wife, Mrs. Younghusband, and at that time she was in Darjeeling while he was in Tibet. This is a view card sent by a member of the Younghusband expedition. It was sent from the field post office at Gyeongse, which is a major city in Tibet, in 1904. And he sent it to a friend of his in the town of Labong, which is the staging area near Darjeeling. Sven Hedin, the Swedish explorer, sent his notes that he made while he was doing his explorations and discoveries. He sent them by registered mail to his father in Stockholm. And then he collected these when he returned home and used these notes that he sent to his father, who had saved them, obviously, to create the books, many books that Sven Hedin wrote. This has it's kind of faint here, but there's a boxed temporary post office registration mark on the front. The stamps were on the back of the envelope, and they're canceled at the Gyeongse and what was known as the Tibet Siliguri base there. And as he sent these letters to his father with the notes inside, his father numbered them with this red ink on the front, and also put the received date. For example, this is looks like the 13th of March in 1904. In 1909, as I mentioned before, China invaded Tibet, forcing the Dalai Lama to flee to India. China overprinted its 1902 to 1910 definitives in Chinese, English, and Tibetan for use in post offices in Tibet. This is an inverted overprint, which is one of the rarities of Tibet. It is not known in used condition, either on or off cover. Just mint examples remain. This is a letter showing the use of these Chinese overprinted stamps. It was sent from Lhasa, Tibet to Kathmandu, Nepal in 1911. The 2 annas, this is a 2 anna overprinted stamp. That plus the half anna Indian stamp was added in Yatung to get the cover out of Tibet. Tibetan stamps were not recognized because they never joined the UPU. When letters were sent internally, they could use the Chinese stamps. So we'll be seeing more of these native issues. But if they went out of Tibet, for example, to Nepal or anywhere else in the world, they had to have stamps of India. This is a 1920 registered letter from Nepal, from the minister in Gyeongse in Tibet, and it was sent to the commander-in-chief of the Nepal army in Kathmandu. This is the reverse of that cover. It shows a British post office bridge cancel at Gyeongse down here. Canceling the Indian stamps, and then there's an oval Kathmandu marking over here when it went into Nepal, and then there's a Nepal bridge cancel showing arrival. This blue label, was created by Captain Noel, who was involved with the promoting and advertising and making philatelic items such as this postcard of the Mount Everest expedition in 1924. This was the expedition in which Mallory and Irvine lost their lives. Now, this stamp is known in multiples and different shades and a couple of different varieties, and I had that in my collection, but it was just too much to show that in a brief story of the stamps and postal history. Okay, now we get into the first native stamps of Tibet. It was a set of 5 stamp values, and at first Tibet went to people in England. Specifically Waterlow and Sons, and asked them to design. They gave them some design suggestions: the lion, the Tibet postage in English and in Tibetan, and they asked them to prepare essays. Sometimes these are referred to in catalogs or auctions as proofs, but they're not. They're actually essays because they're not necessarily in the color of the issued stamp. But instead, I guess they couldn't afford, Tibet could not afford what Waterlow wanted to charge them to print the stamps for them. So they took their design and prepared the stamps themselves within the country in 1912. This is the lowest value, the 1/6 Dranka, which shows this lion again in a circle with Tibet postage in both Tibetan and English. Actually, the Tibetan wording says Tibet letter post. This is an example of usage of one of these stamps on a cover, and the printing is quite crude. I mean, you can see some are very faint because the inking was not done properly. There are also varieties and shades because every time they decided to make a few more, they couldn't exactly duplicate the printing formula, the ink formula. These stamps were printed in a block of 12, a solid block of 12 with 12 of these stamp designs on it. The paper varies from thick to very thin, and some of them include have inclusions like pieces of bark, other things like wood fiber. And actually, the paper for these postage stamps was made by six different families. So this just contributes to the wide variety of papers that you will find on the Tibet stamps. Well, no, okay. I want to go back. I forgot to mention something very important here. This little squiggle here is actually the numeral 74 in Tibetan. And that numeral is handwritten, and the vertical lines here were done to prevent anybody from opening the envelope before it reached its destination. And the reason for the 76, or rather 74, is that there was a penalty. If anyone opened this letter who was a courier or a carrier of the letter, they would be subject to the curse of 74, which is interesting because what it amounts to is that the 74 stones were placed one at a time on the individual's chest until they suffocated and died. That's an interesting kind of philatelic or postal penalty. Okay, the second value is the 1/3 tranca. There's a single here and a sheet of 12. And it is normally used or found in cover in pairs because that's what met the registered letter rate, and the cover is from about 1920. The half tranca, this is the third weight step postage, and that's not very commonly used. I have one example used on a piece of stationery. This was a 1931 letter written from Lhasa, sent from Lhasa to Farajong, which is within Tibet, and but used a 1 anna stamped envelope of Nepal. And this little drawing here is actually like a trademark of the trader who was the one who created, or he was the sender of the letter. It happens to be of the Dakwa family, which was a very important trading family in Tibet. Okay, the next value was the 2/3 tranca. This paid by itself in one stamp, the registered letter rate. And it's interesting, if you look closely, you'll see that these two stamps have the word postage misspelled. It actually says potsage, P-O-T-S-A-G-E. It was an error. It's not particularly valuable because it's fairly common to all of the sheets that were produced using this denomination. But the one interesting aspect is if you try to cut a block of 4 anywhere from this cover, you will have at least 1, if not 2, copies of the stamp automatically included in your block. This is a registered cover, and the reason we know it's registered, in addition to the fact that it's a registry rate stamp being used, this design, this little manuscript design with almost like a circular with a little knob on the top, says registered mail. And it looks like it went to Sikkim, which is related to Tibet, nearby Tibet. But the next value in the series, the 1 tranca, very little information is known about the stamp and what rate it paid. So finding examples of it, even on cover, are pretty unusual, specifically commercial coverage. So this is probably a philatelic one. You can tell by the brevity of the address and the nice negative cancel here that it's probably philatelically inspired. Now, around 1950, a stamp appeared, green, looks very much like the number 1, and it was thought at first to be just a different shade. But actually, when you look at the denomination figures, it turns out it's a new value called 1 sang. And again, very little information is known about the 1 sang stamp. Here's a block of 6, and here's a full sheet of them. But they apparently were used on telegraph forms. And in fact, you can see some little staple holes here, which indicate that it was at one time stapled to a telegram form. It is occasionally seen on covers, but they're probably philatelically inspired for the most part, because it really wasn't a postage stamp so much as related to telegrams. Now, the second issue appeared in 1924 with 2 values. There was the 4 Tranca, which is blue. Sometimes it's ultramarine. It's a bunch of different shades, and it was meant for parcels and also possibly used on telegram forms too. So to find it on a cover means it's probably philatelically inspired as far as the usage is concerned. But it's rather scarce. And the second value in the same set was the 8 Tranca. Here's a single and a sheet of them. And again, the sheet is 1 solid black of wood with the 6 stamp designs in it. They were printed in sheets, and then the sheets were cut apart to make the individual stamps. This just shows again probably a philatelic usage of the stamp on cover. Okay, now we get into the third issue, which again are 5 different values. They were issued initially between 1933 and 1955. However, they continued to produce it all during the 1940s and up into the early 1950s. Now, my collection and interest in Tibet ends when the communist Chinese took over the country. So basically, the usages I have go into the early 1950s and stop there. Now, these stamps were printed differently because each stamp is a different die, or they call them cliches. And they were held together, 12 of them, to form a sheet, and they were held together with a leather thong. And that's how the sheets were printed. And most of the stamps were ungummed and issued it that way and issued imperforate. But some people wanted to make perforated stamps, so they take a Singer sewing machine and do a kind of individual do-it-yourself perforation. That was only done during the early period of these stamps, probably in the early 1930s. And then the 2 holes over here are part of where a staple went through to hold several sheets together. This is the second value, the half Tranca, and this unusual Bister shade is very scarce. It was issued in 1940, and there are less than 40 copies of the stamp known. This is a pair of the half Tranca, and it has a small town cancel of Deschen. It's like any other collecting area. If you have a cancellation of New York or Philadelphia, that's one thing. If you can find a small town cancel, that's even better, because they're obviously a very limited supply. Again, the British India stamp paid the rate to get it from Kathmandu to Gyeongsang. And then in Gyeongsang, which was the entry into Tibet, this half Tranca stamp was added so it could be forwarded to Lhasa. Here's the third stamp in the set of 5 from the 1933 issue. This is the 2/3 Tranca. It's in what is known as the second setting. Now, what I mean by setting is that I mentioned before that these 12 cliches were held together with a leather thong. Well, you guess what happened over with time. The leather thong broke and the 12 cliches went on the floor, and you had to get down, scramble, and put them together again and put another thong around it. But when they were reassembled that way and reset with the leather thong to hold them together, they were in a different sequence. You can actually differentiate each one of these through little tiny plate flaws and other elements that are in the literature and describe the different. And so these, instead of being positions 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, they were different configuration in the second setting. And then in some issues, there were a third setting and a fourth setting. This is a block of 6 of the 2/3 Tranca. It was often used to achieve the 4 Tranca registration rate. Now, again, we have the purple logo, hand stamp of the trader, and then this little indication of the registration of the manuscript indication. The third issue, the 1 Tranca value. Let me go back. I failed to mention that these 2 stamps here are actually a proof sheet. And the reason they are known as a proof sheet is that these 2 cliches never existed together in any of the settings of the sheets that are known. And therefore, they were actually a proof, like a die proof of this stamp with these 2 cliches, but they're the only times that they're found next to each other is in the die proofs, and the die proofs are scarce, as you might imagine. Okay, the 2 Tranca, or excuse me, the 1 Tranca, and there's interesting paper crease. I like to get those things, because they're kind of like production flaws. And this is a 1936 letter. It was sent from Nepal to Lhasa, and it was paid to get into Gyeongsang again, but the ultimate destination is Lhasa, so it had to have in Gyeongsang, where it arrived in 1936. It had to have the 1 Tranca stamp added to pay the postage to get it from Gyeongsang into Lhasa, which was the final destination. This is the 2 Tranca value. Again, there's a single of the perforated type. And again, there's an interesting pre-printing paper crease, which was discovered, I guess, after the sheet was printed. So it was then opened out so that you can see more dramatically the crease. And there is an error in color of this issue. And it's this yellow error. It's the wrong shade. And it is, see if I have any information about how scarce it is. Yes, there are less than 10 of them known. Usage of the 2 Tranca in 1950. This is a bisect, which are rather unusual and not frequently found. But in order to meet the rate of 5 Trancas, so you have 2 2s and a half of a 1 to make the 5 Tranca rate. And these are very confusing because the 2 Tranca and 1 Tranca values have very similar colors. So you have to look at the little figures and figure out the denomination for sure. And there are reference works that you can study to find that. This is the 4 Tranca value. Tranca value is the 5th of the 5 stamps. This is just a native town cancel of a town called Gyeonggi. It was probably printed around canceled around 1947. What happened here was that when one of these sheets fell apart, they never found this number 4 cliche. And it is known that sometime later, you begin to see sheets of this in a new setting, which has a stamp in that position, which is actually a 13th cliche. Here's the 4 tranca bisected to make a 2 tranca rate. And that's just a native wax seal. This is from about 1953, registered letter again. Now we get into what are the so-called official stamps. I think there are 5 of them in the set, different denominations. This is the scarcest of them. They're rather large, and their usage is probably mostly philatelically inspired because they didn't serve any specific postal use as far as the people who were experts and have written the literature about these official stamps. They have the word stamp, and then they have Tibetan postage in the Tibetan lettering. And these are the other 3 values that make up the 5. Just give you an idea of the size that we're talking about here. This stamp actually measures 2 3/4 inches on each side as a square. And they were issued in sheets of 8. Okay, talking about philatelic inspiration, this Nepalese trader lived and conducted business in Lhasa for many years, Toladar Pratakman. And so he was a collector, and he knew collectors from around the world, and he would have them send things like a first day cover to him and addressed to him where he was in Lhasa, but it had to go into Gyanse, which was the entrance city into the country of Tibet. And there, one of his henchmen applied the official stamps in this case in order to pay the postage to get it from Gyanse into him and Lhasa. But again, the whole thing is smells very philatelic. Then there were another set of 5 stamps issued probably in the early 1950s called the telegraph stamps. And you usually see them with this multi-bar cancel on them, and apparently they were attached to in payment for telegraph forms. And this is an entire sheet. This is just a pair of this value. This is an entire sheet, and apparently they were now had graduated from wood blocks or wood cliches to copper plates, because these are nail markings here in the press in the border of the sheet, indicating that it was probably a piece of metal, most likely copper, nailed to a wood block to in order to print the sheets of the telegraph stamps. This is the 10 sang value. Again, it was used on a registered letter. There's the registration manuscript marking, and this is from around 1952. This is a Musk merchant advertising cover sent from Calcutta to Farishang in Tibet. Musk was an important major export from Tibet. It was used primarily in perfumes as a fixative to retard evaporation of perfumes. Another most likely philatelically inspired cover, this 1941 cover was sent from the United States to Tibet. The addressee is highly unlikely. It says Standard Oil, Lhasa, Tibet, which sounds not very imaginative. But I think what happened is that the sender wanted to send this and knew it would be returned, and he would gather a number of postal markings from Tibet by doing so. So this is the front of it, and it was censored because it was during the Second World War, 1941. And the back of the cover looks like this. And so he achieved his goal in spades by getting all these different markings. There's a dead letter marking from Calcutta, one from Bombay. There's a manuscript marking in red ink, which states no convention of exchange of mails between India and Tibet, no agent fiancé, hence returned to sender. And of course, there was a return to sender marking there too. Moving into the literature, Harrison Diaz Haverbeck of the Collectors Club of New York wrote this monograph. It was probably one of the first serious handbooks on the stamps of Tibet, and lists a lot of these varieties and the colors and so on. However, the major Bible for many years was Arnold Waterfall's book, and it was issued in 2 editions. And he goes into not only defining all the little plate flaws and the different cliches of the 3rd issue, but he shows examples of usage and talks to some extent about race. But rate information has been very difficult to obtain on these covers. There is a Nepal and Tibet Philatelic Study Circle. It was founded in England. A lot of the members now reside in the United States. And there is a U.S. secretary and also an editor. They publish this quarterly journal called Postal, which is about Nepal, Tibet, and sometimes they'll slip in a article about Bhutan because they're close related geographically. However, the current major Bible is this new book, which was issued during Stockholmia by the Royal Philatelic Society of London. And Danny Wong, in fact, he just sold some of his Tibet collection through Sphinx in London. He and Steve Chazen compiled everything that they knew and had already existed. Then they cleaned up the literature, changed dates because they had more documentary evidence to make the corrections. And they did put in some right information in this book. So this is now the standard reference work. There is a copy of this in the APRL. And that is the end of the talk. So I'll entertain any questions, comments, what have you.
Round of applause for Alan. Again, everyone's sitting back in their chair. I see applause, Alan. They all have their mics muted, but it's phenomenal. So we thank you. I'm looking at everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, just thank you. Thank you. And this, of course, we know this will be shared and we appreciate that, Alan. Just phenomenal. I have a quick question too, really just from a postal historian perspective. One, I trust you've learned a little Tibetan and the language because you can clearly decode what's on most of these covers. But is it safe to say that it looks like from what you shared, most of the mail stayed within the country? How
Yes,
much of it, not a lot went out of the country. Is that what I'm guessing?
That's true. Most of the mail was internal. And I do not speak or write Tibetan language. There was a fellow lived down near, I guess he lived in Charleston, West Virginia. I forget his first name. His last name was Singer. He had a world-class exhibit of Tibet. And I often used him as a reference if I wanted to decipher a cover, an address or something like that. I used him. Also, what I didn't mention is that the stamps are so crude, they're very easily counterfeited. As a matter of fact, let me give you a little anecdote. The reason I got interested in Tibet was that I wandered into Gimbel's as a kid in downtown Philadelphia. I grew up in the suburb of Philadelphia. And I had a little bit of my allowance money with me, and I was looking for some stamps to buy. And there was a set of the 3rd issue of Tibet underneath the glass plate in Gimbel's department store. And I thought, geez, they're not that expensive. I think I can afford that. And they also were so fascinating and exotic looking. So I bought them. And after I started to read the literature, I discovered they were counterfeits. So since then, I said, I'm not going to determine. I'm going to learn more and more about this and get the genuine stuff. But the way to avoid getting burned, and I would not buy on eBay because even photographs that appear on there are very deceptive. I would buy from known dealers who understood the material, that knew the genuine from the counterfeit. I had a counterfeit collection. I turned it over to the APS, to their expertising group. So they're very difficult to, as I say, I wouldn't buy them on eBay because I'd say probably 90% that you see there are not genuine.
Thank you, Alan, for that clarity. Any questions? Any other questions, please? Let's open it up.
Yeah, I have one, Alan. You mentioned China coming in around 1902, and then you had the first issues by Tibet itself. Did
Yeah.
China actually leave, or did they let Tibet to its own postage system?
Yeah. When China came in, they came in there was around 1910, 1911, and they were only there for about 2 years. And in order to use local mail, and their first issue of Tibet had not issued yet. They came out around 1912. The stamps were used for sending mail within Tibet. And I think I had one example there of a letter with the overprinted Chinese stamp. But they were only there for a short period of time. They pulled out. And then after a while, the folks in the Tibetan government decided they ought to have their own postage stamps to mail stuff internally and within the country. So they developed their own stamps.
What kind of numbers are there for these stamps as far as production? Just thousands?
Yeah. I don't have numbers, but you can tell if you get a current Scott catalog, they are listed there. You can tell from relative value. They're not particularly, all three issues are not particularly scarce. The second issue with the large 4 and 8 Franca values in blue and carmine, they're harder to find, especially on covers, which are probably only going to be philatelically inspired anyway. The most prolific were the stamps of the third issue, because as I said, they were started in 1933 and they continued to produce them year after year into the early 1950s. So they are probably the most readily available if anybody starts looking to buy Tibetan stamps. The 1910 issue of 5 values, they're scarcer, particularly in multiples and shades and on cover, except for that 1 cent green, the low value. That was the common letter rate. And they are very frequently seen on covers that are not particularly expensive. You can probably get one for $10 or $15.
Thank you. Were all the stamps issued ungummed?
Yes, imperfect and ungummed.
Okay. Okay. And is there a reason why they didn't join the UPU, or they weren't invited, or they not meet all
I have
the
no idea.
qualifications?
I guess they had no reason to. I really don't know the politics behind that decision, but that was the fact, and that of course limited the kind of stamps they could use, and that's why if a trader, businessman, or a government official wanted to send something out of Tibet, they had to use the stamps of India. Because India was part of Britain, which had control over India in that early period, was members of UPU.
And on the wax seals, I've usually seen them red, but you gave it a different name. Did they start at that brown color?
The brown were more like a wax seal used to close an envelope in the back. The Dalai Lama cover that I showed was actually a folded letter, and that was a hand stamped seal in red. It wasn't really a seal as far as, quote, sealing the envelope like you have an official seal, or the ones that the U.S. Post Office used to open for resecuring damaged mail. They were just referred to as seals, and they come in a number of different types and sizes. And there is, in fact, a whole literature just devoted to the seals that are used on Tibetan mail.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? Because I know I have a couple more, but I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to ask. Well, I'll ask another. I mean, Alan, it's still, these are typography, and this is, you would expect that in the earliest days, but to have this sort of, I guess, really crude production, the way that you shared into the 30s, 40s, and 50s, I think for many of us that, collect other parts of the world where you've seen the evolution of,
Much more advanced
different printing processes, right? That they just maintained this straightforward and simple process. They produced what they needed for in country, and it worked for them, right? And they didn't need to go to any other lengths to produce anything at a different level, correct? So,
of course, the need for stamps didn't exist because the literacy rate was very, very low.
Very low.
So the only, as I say, only government officials and businessmen primarily were in the habit of sending letters.
Yeah. And so there clearly were fixed routes, and they must have had, folks like we had here in the earliest days of moving mail across this country, right? And they would clearly have sacks overland by whatever means possible to get from
probably carried on the back of a yak.
Yes, right. That's exactly what I'm asking. That's clearly how some of these went, right? So but so I guess the other question to follow up is, because most of the mail was really in country, other than some of the philatelic, which you showed, there must have been the need for government and or some of these traders to communicate across the border, right, into India and or, or outside the country. So those must not be very common.
Yeah,
right?
very, very rarely seen. And of course, there were some philatelically inspired ones like that incoming U.S. first day cover.
Yes.
But I think it was probably a pretty provincial environment that most of the mail as such was done internally. And the Nepalese traders were prevalent within Tibet because they had goods like the musk that they wanted to export. And so there was a fair amount of mail used between Tibet and Nepal. There are combination covers that show both the Nepal stamps and Tibet stamps on them.
Oh, so that was my next question. So there are those, because I know we didn't see them. Okay, great. Because you saw some other mixed use, but there are those too. Thank you for that. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Talking about routes and covers, because of the obvious problems with counterfeits of the stamps, there was always a lot of suspect attitude about the covers. And there was the dealer, an old Nassau Avenue or Street stamp dealer in New York. His name was Frank Warner. And I bought from him over the years. In fact, he had stamps and also occasionally a cover from Tibet. And somebody wrote to him once and said, well, how can you tell it's a genuine, Tibetan cover? And he says, it's very simple. You smell the cover. If it smells like yak dung, it came down on the back of a pack animal out of the Himalayan mountains.
So now that could be forged, but I don't know a lot of folks that are going to go find. Yeah, I'm just saying, I like to see some smiles. I don't know that anybody's going to go get some yak dung and try to make a modern cover. That's a great comment, Alan. Thank you for sharing that. No idea. So do you have the contents with some of these? Because like you say, it's government business and or it's trade, right? So I know you showed a lot of covers and some were open and some were closed, but there clearly some have contents and you could decode what they were talking about.
The only ones that I've seen that have content are actually the folded letters in the early period, before there were actually envelopes. I do not have any mail with envelopes from the 30s, 40s, and 50s with contents. They only exist as covers. That's the way I've found them in the marketplace.
Understood. Okay.
Alan, my father-in-law used to use a phrase when it was very cold out. He said, we're going to have to cover ourselves with rancid yak butter to get warm. Is there a lot of plating activity going on in the research of Tibetan?
Yes. Possibly? Yeah. And in order to understand these different settings, you have to know the plate flaws and the characteristics which are spelled out in the literature.
Mm-hmm. And what was the term you used for the images when they're made out of wood?
What was that?
What was the term you used when the images?
Cliches.
Cliche. Okay.
Yeah, the individual ones, and that's only true for the 1933 issue. The two earlier ones, it was just a solid block of wood with the 6 images of the stamp on the single block. So we didn't have the problem with the leather thong and having them fall on the floor and be reassembled in a different configuration. That's only with the 1933 issues.
So it's safe to say in that same vein, because you showed a lot of unused panes, that those were extras that clearly were not used, that because so little mail, I guess, was used, but they printed excess, that those are available, right? So you can do that plating sort of study, correct?
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. That makes, yeah. I'm a plater, so anybody can identify the subtleties in each of these individuals. I'm always interested in knowing that you can do that. So, excellent. Any other questions for Alan, please? Phenomenal. Alan, another round of applause, please, for Mr. Warren and this phenomenal trip to Tibet.
I'm looking at the logo of the society. What are those two items in the bottom?
They look like knives or something. I'm not sure what they are. I don't
Okay.
see any other utility.
Yeah.
But they might be some other item that was used in a dance or who knows what.
Yeah. I like the way they use the style of the stamps themselves.
Yeah, right.
You know, it was very primitive looking, the items themselves, but they certainly had a lot of color and for me, a lot of eye appeal.
Yeah,
And I
they do.
enjoyed going through your presentation when you sent it to me. I said, I'm looking forward to hearing this.
Yeah.
And you can see the plating and the differences between one stamp and the next. So that's great.
Well, we have to ask Alan, you know, you had a nice sale. Have you kept an item or two from Tibet? Or they've all found new homes for the new collectors? I've just asked.
Do not own any Tibetan material, except there were some ephemera like propaganda labels, anti-communist kinds of things. And I'm writing a series of articles for that Postal Hamal journal on those. But all the stamps and covers I have were sold by Kelleher in December.
Thank you. Fantastic.